Hey, everybody. Hi. Hi, Substack friends. Nice to see you towards the end of summer. I'm going to be off the grid or try to be off the grid starting tomorrow. But I had an opportunity to do an important interview that I really wanted to share with you all because it has to do with early onset colon cancer. Um, as many of you know, or if you followed me through the years, you know I have been intensely interested and a huge advocate for colon cancer screening. And as some of you might remember, I lost my husband, Jay, Ellie and Carrie's dad, Jay, to colon cancer when he was just 42 years old. And I learned a ton about the disease during his illness and have continued to be an advocate not only through Stand Up to Cancer, but talking about it, taking Jimmy Kimmel to get a colonoscopy, talking about other ways you can get screened, like through Cologuard, and really trying to emphasize that everyone 45 and over needs to be screened for this disease. Well, I found it very alarming to read in recent years that younger and younger people are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And in fact, it's the number one cause of cancer death in men under 50, the number two cause in cancer deaths in women under 50. By 2030, this is very alarming, colorectal cancer deaths are expected to double, and the disease is predicted to jump to the leading cause of cancer deaths in 20 to 49-year-olds. It's interesting because nobody really knows why this is happening. There are all kinds of theories. But there was an extremely interesting study that was just done by Dr. Timothy Cannon. He's an oncologist. He's the Sheridan Director of the Molecular Tumor Board and co-director of the Gastrointestinal Cancer Program at Inova Shar Cancer. He noticed a common thread or trend rather among a handful of his patients. They were all under 45, the recommended age for, as I mentioned, for colorectal cancer screening. And they were all marathon runners or ultra marathon runners. So he launched in 2022 a 2-year study to determine if there's a connection between extreme running and an increased risk of the disease. The results are in. They've been described as staggering, according to the New York Times, and he's going to be here to talk us through it. So let me get him on the line. As I mentioned, there are a lot of theories about why this is happening to younger and younger people. Some are ultra processed food, obesity, all kinds of things. So we can go over it now that Dr. Cannon has joined us. Hey, Dr. Cannon, very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for all you've done for colorectal cancer screening awareness.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's something I felt so strongly about because as I mentioned at the top of this live, my husband Jay was 41 when he was diagnosed. No family history. His mother did have ovarian cancer. His grandmother had breast cancer. And I know there's a school of thought that glandular cancers may be related. And even if you don't have colon cancer in your family, you need to talk to your doctor about potentially screening early. But I am really upset because I've heard anecdotally, Dr. Cannon, from a lot of people who are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, like in their 20s, 30s, early 40s, prior to the age they're supposed to be screened. And before we talk about your study, which I think is fascinating, I think it's frustrating. Well, I guess this is the way of the world, but it's frustrating that we don't know why this is happening. Do you have any theories or have you seen research that you think is compelling, pointing to one thing or another?
I really haven't seen anything that is convincing about one unifying reason for the young onset colorectal cancer epidemic. I think it's fair to call it an epidemic based on those stats that you cited that I've heard many times. But I really don't have a sense of one unifying thing. I hear a lot of theories that are thrown around in committees and at our conferences that are all very interesting. But I don't see any proof that any one of them is true. Of course, you probably heard all the same theories. Whether it's acne medication as a teenager predisposed to changing the microbiome, or drinking bottled water with BPA, or processed foods, or any number of those things. But these are really hard things to prove. how do you isolate one sort of environmental exposure among all the different things we're exposed to? So it's going to take a huge effort to figure this out, but it is definitely real. I see them in our office every week. Patients under 45, under 40, often under 30, with colorectal cancer. I don't really remember seeing it that often, 15 years ago.
It's crazy, and you just mentioned a couple theories I hadn't even heard. I mean, I know that there are theories about microplastics disturbing the
Right.
microbiome. There's also the overprescription of antibiotics, for things that aren't bacterial, that are viral, that somehow may have an impact. As you said, ultra-processed foods. I don't know if people are looking at screens and putting screens on your lap, if that's
Yeah.
something, but as you said, epidemiological studies are notoriously difficult to do, and they have to, they go for over such a long period of time. But I feel like this is a national emergency, and I'm even talking to some colon cancer advocates about putting together some kind of dream team of scientists from all over that could really focus on why this is happening, because it's just such a travesty. These young people, I mean, as a doctor, I don't know. And my nephew Ray
Yes.
works with you in your group, and he's a gastroenterological oncologist, which is a mouthful. But it's so heartbreaking when you see these young people come in, and oftentimes they have metastatic colon cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm blessed to work with your amazing nephew, and we see it all the time and talk about it. It is, and it's devastating. And I think the dream team idea is tremendous. I mean, I currently am part of at least one committee like this, but I kind of feel like we only scratched the surface. And I think getting together bigger, better teams and raising funds for a really sort of comprehensive, effort to get to the bottom of this is really needed. It's devastating.
And what's interesting, Dr. Cannon, is a lot of medical institutions now have early onset colorectal cancer
Yes.
departments and specialists like you. So I think it's really critically important. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Dr. Timothy Cannon. He is with Inova Health in Northern Virginia, my old stomping grounds, right? And he has done a really interesting study about early onset colon cancer, which I promise you I'm going to get to in a second. But just parenthetically, I wanted to tell you, Dr. Cannon, I did a panel about this at South by Southwest last spring. I talked to someone who's an expert in the microbiome and the woman at MD Anderson who is the head of early onset colon cancer. And she told me it's really confounding because she was seeing a lot of elite athletes, marathon runners in her practice that were coming in. And she was theorizing that perhaps these protein supplements or some of the things, meal replacements, which, by the way, are ultra processed foods, may be contributing it to it. So when I read the piece in the New York Times about your study, I was like, wow, you need to talk to, I'll get you her name. In fact, it's in my research that Adriana did. Um, I need to put you together with her because she pointed that out to me. Anyway, getting to your study. You studied, as I mentioned, Dr. Cannon, everyone studied elite athletes, specifically marathon runners. Tell me how you got it. Oh, it's Nancy Yu. Nancy Yu is the
Oh, okay.
doctor. Thanks, Adriana.
All right.
Anyway, tell me how you decided to embark on this study in the first place and what the study was for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah. So, well, what happened was in around 2018 and 2019, maybe 2020, somewhere in that time frame, there was a 6-month period where I uh, saw 3 new patients. They were new to me that had stage 4 colorectal cancer. They were in their 30s. One of them may have been 40, and they were just extreme endurance athletes. 2 of them had run dozens of ultra marathons, and they define an ultra marathon as a 100-mile race. So just, extreme long distance runners. The other had run dozens of triathlons. a female patient who was 40. And
Ugh.
so I saw these all around the same time, and they all told me a very similar story, and that was that they went to their doctor. They told them that they sometimes had bleeding after they ran, and they were told that, that is runner's colitis and that is normal. And, I had run the 2010 New York Marathon, and I remember speaking to a lot of the marathon runners, and they would call that the trots or the runner's trots. And I had heard about that. And it struck me that, okay, this is common, but how do we know it's normal or not dangerous? There's, what you wouldn't think that, cell death after running for a long time. And of course, in my mind, I'm envisioning a mechanism here where after they get to some mile 20 or mile 30, they divert all the blood flow to their legs and their gut infarcts. In other words, they don't have as much blood flow to their gut and maybe the tissue dies. And that just sounds like a precursor to cancer to me. And so I thought, okay, it may be common, but is it really normal or benign? And I thought this should be studied a little more. I looked on PubMed and other, sort of resources to see if anybody had studied this before, and they really hadn't. And so, other than in sort of, does running marathons cause cancer broadly? Nobody had
Mhm.
really honed in on colon cancer. And it just so happened that, around that time, we were opening a prevention center here at our cancer center at Inova called the Seville, I might butcher the name here, but it's a cancer prevention center. And your nephew, Ray, Dr. Wadlow, is one of the leaders there, along with the director is Dr. Kaltman, and then our president, Dr. Deacon. They all wanted to get studies done at the prevention center. And I said, well, this is a perfect idea. We can do this. We can,
Mhm.
get together a study where we are able to, you know, um, screen people who are extreme runners. And I didn't know how many ultra marathoners were out there, and I wasn't really sure how we would find 100 of them. But I thought this would be a really important study to do and see if they have precancerous lesions or polyps, in higher abundance than the rest of the population. I didn't expect to find any cancers because even though it's becoming more and more common, it's still, really small. And we were excluding people that had inflammatory bowel disease or a known familial syndrome for
Mhm.
cancer. But we wanted to see if they had cancer precursor lesions. And so we went about started a study and tried hard to figure out a way to recruit these runners. And that was the tricky part, by the way, really, knowing how do you find, 100 runners that would be willing to get a colonoscopy before they're of age,
Right.
because
And and
our
and by the way, Dr. Cannon, these weren't all ultra marathoners. There were some regular marathoners, but were
yes.
they, I mean, what was the criteria? Did they have to, I mean, for example, if you ran one or two marathons a year, which by the way, I could never run a marathon. I can't understand how anyone can physically do that, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Could you be a part of the study?
You had the criteria were pretty strict. You had to be between 35 and 50 and have run at least 26.2 marathons or two ultra marathons, which for the purpose of the study we defined as 50-kilometer races, so roughly 30-mile races. It turned out that most of the people that entered the study had run ultra marathons before, but we had 19 patients who had just run marathons but had run at least five. So we're talking about fairly prolific runners here.
And
And
I know that over the course of 2 years, Dr. Cannon, you administered colonoscopies to 100 of them, these, ultra marathon runners or marathon runners between the age of 35 to 50. And this is when you were really shocked by the results. What did you find?
so going into the study, we expected that we would find, somewhere between 1 to 5 people per 100 with advanced adenoma, which is sort of there's adenoma, which is a polyp that is precancerous. And then there are certain features that make it an advanced adenoma, making it the very most likely to become cancer. Sort of the larger ones are the ones that have poor differentiation or have villous architecture.
Or the
Just
ones,
sort of
what about the ones that penetrated, the colon wall and went into the lymph nodes? Would those be considered?
well, that with a polyp typically doesn't go into the lymph nodes. So, but
But if it
if it
becomes
had,
like, anyway, don't worry, that I
yeah,
got
yeah.
ahead of
But the
you.
deeper it is, I think to your point, the deeper it is, the more dangerous it is. So,
Right.
yes. And so, and we put in the paper what the criteria we use for advanced adenomas are, which is fairly standard. And so we ended up finding that 15 out of 100 had advanced adenoma, 41 out of 100 had adenoma. So nearly half of them had precancerous polyps, and 15 out of 100 had advanced adenomas.
which is insane. I mean, and when you saw the results of that, were you pretty stunned?
I was surprised. I mean, obviously, I did the study because I thought there may be something, a signal there or something that would be significant. But I didn't really expect 15. I thought, if I see 8 to 10, that would feel significant to me. But yeah, I was surprised at 15. And I think obviously in the some of the articles that have come out, there has been some, I think, very justified and appropriate criticism. We didn't have a control group, for instance, which would have been obviously much more expensive and it'd be difficult to find controls. Our average age was 42.5 years old in the study, and so to find 100 people willing to do colonoscopies that aren't really the target of the study might have been a challenge, and it certainly would have been more expensive. But I do think that would have sort of enhanced the scientific value of the study because, for all we know, this has something to do with Virginia or DC, the DC area, or
Right.
some other factor that we didn't control for. But I still found the results pretty staggering that 15 out of 100 had advanced adenomas.
Yeah, for sure. And Adriana just added that the figure among extreme runners was even higher than the 12% rate among Alaska natives who are unusually prone to colon cancer, which of
Yeah.
course makes me want to ask you, why are Alaska natives unusually prone to colon cancer? Is it have to do with diet or climate? What is it? Do you know?
I have to admit that I know nothing about that. And I remember from medical school hearing those stats when we would do the sort of the section on colorectal cancer, but I haven't thought about it since until that article. And I thought, oh, that's right. And I want to look back into that because I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah.
I thought it was more of a genetic, founders or some sort of, genetic effect, from having an isolated population, but I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, of course, the $1 million question is, why do you think this is happening? What is going on in the biologies of these elite athletes who are in incredibly good shape? I know there was one that I was reading about that in my prep that there was a guy who was 39 and a vegan and
Yeah.
incredibly healthy. Tell me about him, and then I'll ask you what you think's going on physiologically.
Yes, that was, right, and that I've heard that from a lot of both the patients that I've seen with cancer. By the way, I mentioned the original 3, there have been several I've seen since then as well, and several that are vegan. And, in fact, in our study, we did ask about we didn't ask as many dietary questions as I wished we had, and we're gonna go back and reconsent them for another survey that has more detail. But several of them were vegans and several were vegetarians. So, but Katie, the answer to your question is that when I conceived the study, I had an idea in my mind about what was happening. And ever since it's come out and I've gotten all these comments from interested scientists, it's sort of expanded my view of what the possibilities are. And my thinking may have been too narrow, I'm realizing in retrospect. But what I described to you before was kind of what I thought was that these infarcts, you
What
kind of
is an
think of,
infarct? Sorry to be
yeah,
stupid,
no
but
worries.
what's an infarct?
Yeah, like, when you have a heart attack, for instance, the blood supply is cut off to the heart muscle and the tissue dies.
Oh yeah, like a cardiac infarction, right?
Exactly, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I was picturing going on is that, they get to mile 30, all the blood flows going to their legs and away from their splanchnic or their intestinal circulation. They get no blood supply there, and then the tissue dies. And then, you have cells sort of regenerating in a disorderly fashion, and you have more opportunities for the type of DNA replication error that causes cancer. And, that's very probably an oversimplification, but, I think about lung cancer and smokers being something where, there's a lot of insults to the lung, a lot of damage to the lung, and the tissue regenerates in a disorderly fashion, and there's more opportunities for a mistake in DNA replication or a DNA mutation to happen. And this, again, certainly an
Yeah.
oversimplification. There's more to it than that. But, you think that anyone could get lung cancer, but if you smoked and the cells are turning over so fast, you just have more opportunity for a bad DNA change to cause cancer. And so that's what I was envisioning is these infarcts cause a lot of disorderly cell replication and you have more chances for mutations. But since I that's kind of what I thought when I started the study. People from all over the world now are writing me, their own theories, and I think there's some interesting ones out there. Some of
Well,
them are
tell me
about
some. Yeah, tell me some of the theories.
one I kind of got interested in even before this was all published was regarding the microbiome, which you brought out before. Is there's some studies that show that there's a type of bacteria that's in higher abundance in runners called Prevotella, and but we also are learning more about the microbiome and what is protective from cancer and what is, causes cancer. And there's a lot of focus on that, and in the creation of probiotics and bifidobacteria and you probably heard some of this. E. coli and fusobacterium all have a role in cancer, and so I think that's one thing we want to focus on. We're actually writing a protocol now to do all of their microbiome studies, and that's just a really fast growing field in colorectal cancer that I think is going to bring us some benefit in the coming years. So there's that. I had somebody write about IGF upregulation, insulin growth factor that's really high in runners. Obviously, there's the dietary things. Is it all lifestyle here? Maybe it has nothing to do with infarcts. Maybe it's they drink so many bottled Gatorades that they're exposed to more BPA, or maybe it's the processed, the goos, or the protein bars that they're drinking. So that they're eating during marathons. And I remember when I ran the New York Marathon, I had, every half mile, someone's passing you a goo or a power bar, and all the runners had them. And so, is that a factor or not? I don't know. So I certainly don't know the why, but I'm very suspicious that there's a connection here.
Yeah, talk about. I mean, I've studied and interviewed people about the microbiome, and I still have a hard time kind of visualizing what the microbiome is
Yeah.
exactly. I think of it as like this casing over your sort of GI tract, but how would you describe for like a fifth grader what the microbiome is?
That's so funny you asked that because I have a fifth grader that I just tried to describe this to. But
Really?
yeah, yeah. We'll see if I do better this time. But I do.
Okay.
I think casing is definitely a good term. That's what I envision. That your food goes down your colon and your intestines, and there's literally trillions, we think, of bacteria that are sitting in there, and they're playing all sorts of biological roles. In your gut, and they're generally protective. Most of the bacteria in there is thought to be good, and so when you so I sort of think about it as this sort of army of protective bacteria that are engaging in all sorts of biological functions regarding digestion.
Is
And
it in your stomach and your intestines, or is it like is your microbiome, does it involve other organs like your liver and your kidneys and stuff like that, or is it just really your digestive tract?
well, there is a microbiome associated with all organs, but I don't think it's to quite the abundance of your GI tract.
Got it. So we're talking
Esophagus.
about GI stuff.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and so, right, exactly. These are the ones that live in your gut. And you mentioned earlier the theory about antibiotics. And so, of course, when you give antibiotics, you're treating some infection, pneumonia, or, an ear infection or something like that, or acne, in some cases.
Yeah, I had
And that
never
can,
heard that theory. It's like about Accutane?
well, some people that have really serious acne take doxycycline or
Oh,
aminocycline,
right. You're
and they
right.
take it for
Yes.
such a long period of time, like you would malaria prophylaxis if you lived in Africa or something. You take it for months and months and months, and that's why that's been of interest, as opposed to, if you have an ear infection, you just take it for 7 days. So
Right.
that's why I've heard that brought up before, because it's the reason that many teenagers, have prolonged exposure to antibiotics. All that being said, I've asked all my young colorectal cancer onset people if they took doxycycline, and very few have. So I kind of doubt that's the unifying cause here. But when you take an antibiotic, of course, you're killing the bacteria that's causing the illness, but you're also killing thousands and thousands probably of bacteria that are in your gut that have a positive purpose in there. And so in some ways, taking antibiotics, we know it is maladaptive or not good for you to do multiple times. And the question here is whether that lack of protection predisposes you to cancer. There's one study that somebody from MD Anderson just sent to me that I was just blown away with, and I think you can find it on PubMed, about patients with stage 4 colon cancer that had um, they had been received immunotherapy, and there were some of these patients that responded. Most of them did not, but they actually took the stool from the responders and transplanted it into the non-responders. And according to the paper, there were 3 people that actually responded to immunotherapy once you changed the bugs in your gut to the person who responded.
That's
So
interesting. I've heard about these, what they're called fecal transplants, right?
yes, exactly.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've read some about that. But what about the so we don't really know. So you were saying something is disrupting in these marathon runners and ultra marathon runners the microbiome, but we don't really know what it is. And could it be, you were talking about the blood flowing to your legs, and then the needing to produce more bacteria, more cells rather, in the microbiome, right? Because they're kind of depleted. But are there other things other explanations? And can you talk briefly about the role inflammation plays? Because that is such an important word in cancer research now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And in colon cancer, we know people that have inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Those people, of course, it's an autoimmune disease where their immune system's causing the inflammation, and they are predisposed to cancer. So they
Right.
have a higher cancer rate. And yes, what presumably there is some inflammatory problem in the gut of people who get young onset colon cancer, but precisely what's causing it is hard to know. I do
What
think of these.
causes what ca- I stu- Another stupid question. Sorry if everyone in watching, or if anyone's a scientist or a doctor, but sometimes I just have to translate it into kind of common language. What causes inflammation? What is inflammation, and what causes it?
Well, I mean, inflammation just, it's very basically, I guess you would be described as your immune system fighting something. So when you have a bug bite and you see that red, sort of area around the skin, and that's a bunch of the white blood cells that you're born with going and trying to take care of an insult. And
Right.
that's sort of an example of inflammation, and that's happening all throughout your body to varying degrees throughout your life.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. So, um, this is obviously a conundrum, because you're going to. I know, as you mentioned, there was some criticism of your study because people thought you didn't have a control group. What were some of the other criticisms about the study?
I think the other one that was mentioned there was that we didn't report the family history in detail, and I also agree that I wished we had designed it from the beginning to do more than just say if you don't have a family syndrome, you're ineligible. I wish we had asked for a little bit more detail in their family history because, as one of the writer or one of the commentators mentioned, for all we know, the people motivated to do this study maybe were more motivated because they had a cousin with colon cancer or a brother with colon cancer. So I think that's a valid criticism. That being said, I did learn a lot about the people that participated. I'm not aware of any of them that had a first degree relative with colon cancer,
Right.
and we're going to go back and reconsent them to ask more detail. So we'll get that detail out to people probably with the second iteration of the study.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important to point out that I believe 75% of colorectal cancer cases are sporadic or have no family history.
Right.
you
I'm so
know
glad you
and
brought that up.
and I think sometimes people think, oh, I don't have a family history, I don't need to worry about it, I don't even need to get screened. And it's so critical that people get screened, which brings me to my next question. If you're seeing so many of these patients, Dr. Cannon, who are in their 20s, 30s, even early 40s, um, and the screening recommendation is 45 and over, it it just doesn't seem right, you know? Like, of course, I feel that way about my husband, Jay, if he had gotten screened or if even the doctors back then, because he died in 1998, had been aware that it's possible for younger people to get colorectal cancer, perhaps, you know, it would have been recognized and he wouldn't have been stage 4, with mets all over his liver by the time he was diagnosed. So in terms of public policy, is it just the cost benefit analysis for getting screened at a younger age just isn't there? And I'm sure a lot of people watching this are like, "Holy cow, like, if this is so on the rise and it's happening to younger how can we protect ourselves?" Obviously, taking care of yourself and not eating ultra-processed foods, and we'll talk about the importance of exercise too, because I don't want people to extrapolate from this study that they shouldn't run or exercise or be
Yeah.
physically active, of course. But what about lowering the screening age?
Yeah. Oh, you asked the question I think about so often, and obviously, I can imagine you thought about that a lot through the years. It is a matter of, when it comes to screening, it's always sort of a decision made by a committee with, cost of care and, risk of the screening procedure taken into account. They did move the screening down from 50 to 45. I I really hope and I foresee a future where things besides colonoscopies start to be approved in that younger age group. I mean, there have been really interesting new means of screening that have come out recently. I mean,
Like
there's the
liquid biopsies, like the Grail test, but that has a lot of things about it that I think have a lot of positives. I don't know how you feel about the Grail blood test, but I know all these biotech firms are really working hard to develop a blood test that will show a bunch of early stage cancers, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with you, right? Grail's imperfect, but I think that technology will improve. That's a test that looks for all cancers at once. And I really think that those types of tests have a good future and can be, hopefully in the future can be used like screening tests. There is a colorectal cancer specific screening test, blood test that recently came out called Shield. And, currently, it really isn't approved though for young people. So it doesn't really address the problem we're talking about. But as more and more of these sort of less invasive technologies come out and their cost goes down, I really see a future where younger and younger people are getting screened and I'd advocate for that happening as soon as possible.
I think what's even more important, but probably will take longer to determine, is why are we seeing this? What is
Yeah,
happening in our environment? What is happening in our food supply? What is happening in technology, our interfacing with technology? Like all these things that
yeah,
may be contributing, right?
yeah,
But I think absent of that, you're right. If screening can come before those answers, that would be great. But I think in the meantime, can we just go over symptoms? Because
yeah.
I think that sadly people need to be really aware of their own bodies, and if they have, well, you go ahead. I feel like I could be a doctor when it comes to
You
gastroenterology.
you you
Not
definitely could
really,
be. You
not
you
really.
you
I
know, you
know
really
way too much about this disease,
I
sadly,
can
but why don't
I
you
can
just go
imagine.
over some of the symptoms for people listening? And by the way, what I love about Substack is usually it's a much more intelligent audience usually than your average social media platform,
Yeah,
and they're very interested in a specific topic. So if you all have any questions, I'm gonna go to a couple questions I got on social media. But if you all watching this have any questions for Dr. Cannon or for me about colorectal cancer and early onset and the increase or any kind of gastroenterological health questions, please share them right now. But go ahead and tell us about the symptoms real quick because I want people to be aware of them.
yeah. I think the most common ones are bleeding in your stool. That's a red flag. That and again, that back to the marathoners. So many of them were told it was normal if you run. I would not
Or they
accept
have
that answer.
or they have hemorrhoids, right?
Yeah.
The doctors blow people off and say, "Oh, don't worry, it's
Oh, it's
just
just right.
hemorrhoids."
Exactly. Yeah, that happens all the time. But bleeding in the stool is a sign. weight loss that you didn't expect. If it doesn't fit your lifestyle changes and you've lost, weight unexpectedly, that can be a sign of cancer and is a reason to get checked out. Abdominal pain is also a common symptom, but it's not there all the time. None of these are, in fact. So I think even having one of those things is enough of a reason to try to get checked out.
So, I know that someone asked a really good question because someone said, "What's your recommendation for fiber intake and improving fiber intake?" Because fiber plays a really important role in preventing colorectal cancer, right?
Yes, and also there have been studies that suggest that once you've had colorectal cancer, it reduces the risk of recurrence, both cereal type fibers and vegetable type fibers. So I think that's a really important thing. Obviously, people will ask, well, how much fiber? And it's a little hard to make a specific recommendation there, but I think that we often are short on fiber in our diets, and emphasizing good fiber intake is important and does protect you to some degree. You don't
So
have
when
total
you say
control over
good,
this.
like, how much? I mean, is there a recommended amount?
I can't remember the gram. There was just a study at ASCO about a super high fiber diet, and I can't remember what the number was there. I'm not actually familiar with the units, but I think it was 50 grams or something like that. But I would think of in terms of servings. I think every meal should have a serving of fiber.
Okay.
Really. I mean, again, that's just me spitballing it, but that's what I try to do at home because we know it's protective against colorectal cancer, and it's good for you otherwise, right? It's heart healthy.
Yeah,
There's a
it's good
million
for your
reasons to
heart
do it.
health and all kinds of things. Rachel's
Yeah.
asking about fiber supplements and if they suffice.
I mean, if there's a persuasive reason that you can't eat dietary fiber, I guess it's better to do fiber supplements than nothing. That's not something I've emphasized in my own life or
I
with
mean, I think
patients.
uh, when you can get nutrients and fiber from food, I'm not a doctor, but I would think that it's preferable, but fiber
It makes sense to
supplements
me.
probably don't hurt. Adriana wanted me to ask you about the connection between all extreme exercise and cancer, or is it just running? Because, there are people who are doing weightlifting and all
Yeah.
kinds of exercises, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know. That's a great question. I only saw this happen with the runners and the triathletes. So I have no experience, for instance, with long distance swimmers, but they may be at risk as well. I think maybe that needs to be studied. But the people I have seen and experienced in my clinic that are extreme athletes were the runners.
Yeah, and
So
Adriana said it was actually an audience question, so thank you for that clarification. I just wanna read this other thing, and then I'll let you go. You have more important things to do, but this is so important to tell the public, and we'll kind of do a quick synopsis at the end because I know people join these conversations. Oh, someone says, "Drinking lots of water, any benefit to deter colorectal cancer?"
I don't think there's a proven benefit, but it's good for you otherwise. So I would keep up that practice.
I don't drink enough water, by the way. So someone wrote, I have a son who is 45 years old. He was a captain in the Army. I'm reading this cold, everyone. So, in the Army, stationed at Fort Greely, Alaska for 13 years. There is a group from Delta Junction, Alaska, that have cancer they feel is related to a nuclear accident that occurred back in the 50s that the Army covered up. My son had a huge tumor. They thought it was stage 4. Lucky it was not. It has never spread, but he has had very aggressive chemo and radiation therapy. That's interesting. Again, that kind of speaks to some of these environmental questions, right?
Right. Yeah. And I've never heard that story before, but certainly there's a lot of documented, cases of populations that were affected by being downwind of nuclear reactors or other things like that. So I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah,
It's not something I know a lot about, though.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you hear so much about cancer clusters and some people look askance at the idea of like a lot of people getting cancer in one group, but it makes sense, doesn't it, that there might be environmental factors that are creating these clusters. And one thing that has always frustrated me through the years is why don't scientists study the the relation between the environment and cancer more.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about that as we've been going through this interview, and I think a lot of it is how research is done in the U.S. I mean, these kind of studies require, probably decades of follow up, and I guess it's probably true that that doesn't really fit sort of any career goals for any individual. I really think these kind of things are better done through the National Cancer Institute or the NIH, and so take that as a plug for us trying to keep that funding up and get it going in a different direction than it's going right now, because I think that's the power of epidemiology studies are probably best done on in sort of that in that setting.
Right.
Um,
And in a geographically varied way with yeah, I mean, it is so labor intensive, but also takes so much time. But I think you're
yeah,
right. Someone said genealogy as well. You know, it's interesting. The Mormons keep such good family history records. There was a guy interviewed a long time ago named, I think his name was Dr. Randall Burt, and they do in Salt Lake City. They have this huge, you know, repository of family history records, so they can really study the genealogical aspect of disease
yeah,
because they can really trace it. Because, you know, a lot of people don't know their family history. And like when our grandparents or great grandparents died, they basically said, oh, they died of cancer, but they never, or, you know, they would never say where it originated, right? They would just say, oh, they died of liver cancer, but there's a good chance it originated in their colon, right? Or they died of lung
yes.
cancer. And, you know, so
It's
family,
Yeah, sorry to
go
interrupt
ahead.
you. I was gonna say, it's so funny you bring that up because I went to college in Utah. I worked at the Huntsman Cancer Institute in their genealogy institute,
Oh,
and my job when I was there was actually to look at death certificates and then record, where because they were trying to obviously parse some of these questions out, and you of course, the death certificates are very vague, right? Liver problem, especially from the last century. But that was I think that is a really powerful tool, and Utah's is ahead of the game there for
do you
sure.
know this guy named Randall Burt by any
I
chance?
don't know
Was
him
it
personally,
Randall
but
Burton?
I've seen his writings. Yeah, I know who he is, but I don't know him personally though.
That's so interesting. Well, I'm just going to kind of uh, do a quick synopsis of our conversation for people who joined us late, and hopefully this is helpful to all of you. So Timothy Cannon is a doctor who noticed that he was getting a lot of early onset colon cancer cases. Disturbingly, a lot of marathon and super elite athletes, really runners. And so he did this study and he had 100 people, right? You gave a colonoscopy to 100 people, and you found that these were marathon and ultra marathon runners between 35 to 50. And you found, again, tell us quickly what you found, Dr. Cannon.
Yeah, that 15 out of 100, which is much higher than you would expect, had advanced adenomas, which is a sort of the more advanced type of polyp, and nearly half of them had polyps, had precancerous polyps, had adenomas, so 41%. And so this was in an average age population of 42.5 years old. And that's far higher than you would expect in that population.
So the study was criticized in some quarters for not having a control group and not maybe discussing family history quite as much, but I think it was a really important study. And do you have plans to now continue with this work and expand it?
Oh, for sure. Yes. Especially with all the interest out there. I didn't anticipate there would be this much interest, but yes, we're writing a protocol for a part two and a part three. One would be survey based, where we really dig into family history, nutrition. We're going to look at people's Garmin or whatever their watches that sort of logs how much they run and when they run, and really get into the details survey wise. And then another part will be sort of the scientific correlate part where we are planning right now. Obviously, we have to, get it approved and get funding and everything, but we're writing up the protocol for a to do analyze the microbiome and of the runners, compare them to non-runners, compare them to runners who don't have polyps, and also do a proteomic evaluation. So we have, and we may do some other blood-based correlates. And so we've got the same people that went with me to the Marathon Expo for, in DC for for the marathon. Our researchers, is Jamie Randall and Selena Bonamelli. They're helping kind of work through some of these correlates, and we're all writing the protocol together. I think it's going to be really interesting. We're going to have some of the people from outside that I've just met only recently since this got published, hopefully participating. I'm getting a meeting with some of the interested scientists from around the world that found this interesting.
That's awesome. And so Lori or Apeza, I'm not sure how you pronounce your middle name, Lori, or maybe it's your maiden name, Kelly, said her son runs every day. And I think we need to point out that you are not saying don't exercise, don't run, that runners of all kinds are necessarily predisposed to colorectal cancer. I think that's an important thing to mention, don't you?
Oh, so glad you brought that up. I've been like terrified that I wouldn't remember to say this because exercise is by and large good. We have a big problems in our society from not exercising enough. And one thing that's really worried me is ever since this came out in the New York Times, I've gotten text messages from friends from all over that say, "Thank you for giving me an excuse not to run." And I've been thinking, oh, this is exactly the wrong message. We want you to run. It's just that the question is whether running at an extreme, sort of an extreme amount. Is there a dose of running that's too much? And I believe there is. But that dosage is far more than the average person runs, and so this is not a reason to discourage exercise. In fact, there was a huge study at ASCO by Jeff Meyerhart at Harvard on how exercise after the diagnosis of cancer actually reduces the risk of recurrence. So exercise is good. Too much exercise may be dangerous in this way.
Yeah, good point. And I just want to again close by reminding people the age for colon cancer screening is 45. It was lowered a few years ago by the American Cancer Society. It was 45 for African Americans. Or I think all Black people, not necessarily, they
Right.
could be from the Caribbean or wherever, but because we were seeing a higher incident of colorectal cancer in them, but now everybody, it's recommended at 45 to get your first screening. How do you feel about like Cologuard and stool tests like that? If people are too nervous or for whatever reason, their insurance doesn't cover a colonoscopy or they can't take off work or the prep freaks them out. What do you think about that test? Because I know that I know a lot of people at Exact Sciences, and they're also trying to develop a blood test as well. My feeling is the best test is the one that gets done. What do you think?
Agree 100%. That's exactly what I was going to say. The best test is the one that's going to get done. I personally will choose a colonoscopy for myself because I like the idea of them being able to intervene at the time they're doing it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like one-stop shopping because you do the colonoscopy and the polyp, you guys, obviously, many people know this, can be snipped or removed, even a flat polyp, which are sometimes hard to see. They can be removed during the colonoscopy. And with a Cologuard test, you may have to follow up, but all you have to do is, not to be gross, is poop in a box. I always thought Justin Timberlake should do an ad about this for Cologuard, making a joke about his other
right from
song,
the
which
SNL.
I which I won't go into, but,
There is a great
it's
SNL
just
skit about Cologuard.
it's an alternative, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and whatever people are willing to do is the best one. Obviously, there are some communities where colonoscopies just aren't available. Like, they just don't have enough gastroenterologists to meet the need of the community. And
Right,
so in those places, doing Cologuard or whatever other, stool-based tests, and there's several of them, blood-based, fecal occult blood or Cologuard or the blood tests, are preferable because that's what people can do. And
right.
similarly, even if you're in a resource high area, if you're not willing to do a colonoscopy, please do something else.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention that if you do have a family history, sorry, I just am like the nagging fishwife of colon cancer, but if you do have a family history, for example, my husband Jay was diagnosed at 41. So both of my daughters, because Ellie already turned 31, when they're 31, 10 years before your first line relative was diagnosed, like your mother, your father, a sibling, right? Aunt, uncle, I guess,
Yeah.
grandparent too.
Well, first degree, I think, is just siblings and parents.
Okay, sibling and parents.
Yeah.
You need to get screened 10 years before they were diagnosed. So it's really critically important to know your family history. I also am such a proponent of people getting genetic testing. I've already done it, but I want to go do genetic testing and do a video about it to show people how really easy it is to do genetic testing. It's
Yeah.
not invasive. I actually have a gene that slightly increases my risk of colorectal cancer. Do you know what gene that would be?
Um, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Um,
there's
it's
I
slightly
don't know.
increased. Yeah. Yeah,
And so
I could speculate based on what Ray's told me, but I'm not sure which one it is. I'll have to ask him. By the way,
yeah,
your nephew Ray, he's a huge leader in this. Besides, we're doing our sort of screening program here at Inova. He's part of the Proceed Consortium, which is through New York, which is working on this kind of thing on really understanding family history, particularly as it pertains to pancreatic cancer, and he really gets us to make sure everyone's tested genetically. Like he'll find if one of my patients hasn't done it or I've forgotten, he's on me. He's amazing at that.
he's a
And
wonderful doctor. And my sister, Ray's mother, Emily, died of pancreatic cancer when she was
yeah.
54. And I'm part of that Proceed
Oh, you are okay.
group. I get screened every year and I'm part of their research because of my sister Emily and my great uncle and my uncle, but at a much older age, both died of pancreatic cancer. So,
Yeah.
it's just, I think people are afraid to know their family history, but it really equips you with the tools you need to have to know how much screening you should be doing because listen, the best way to defeat cancer at this point, until we have better therapies and immunotherapy is coming along, and Luis Diaz had that great study at Memorial where rectal cancer was stopped. I know I'm going to stop talking. I'm so passionate about this, but if you detect cancer early, it's so much more curable than if it's advanced. So, like, grow a pair, everybody. Like, get screened, get your genetic testing, and take care of your health because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything, right, Dr. Cannon? It's as
Oh,
simple as that.
and you know that more than anybody. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think
Well,
that's a great message for everybody.
I'm so happy you were willing to tell us about this study. If anybody's interested, the New York Times wrote a piece about this study. I guess it was last week, maybe.
Mhm.
And uh, and if you all, yeah, please keep supporting cancer research. Give to Stand Up to Cancer. Give to any kind of cancer organization because the cuts in federal funding are devastating. I think they're trying to fix that in the Senate. I don't know. I can't keep up with everything that's happening, but just definitely educate yourself and be your own best advocate and get screened for all the cancers that have good screening modalities. It's so important. If you want to be around for the people you love, you really need to do that, everyone.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for your
Anyway, so nice to meet you. Please give my love to Ray. And thank you for all the work you all are doing. You are my heroes. And keep us posted as your research progresses.
I will, and thank you so much for having me on and for being such a great advocate, and, yeah, I'll go give Ray a high five for you. He's the best. I've
Okay,
really loved
good.
working with him.
And let's stay in touch about all the cool stuff you're doing.
Okay. All right. Thank
Okay.
you. Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Dr. Cannon. And thanks, everyone. Get screened, please. Call your doctor. Call your doctor as soon as you stop watching this or make an appointment. Okay. 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 I'll stop now. Okay. Bye, Dr. Cannon.
All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.